United States District Judge Timothy Corrigan and for 23 related offenses. The attack on Judge Corrigan was not only an attack on the man personally, it was an attack on the entire federal judicial system and the rule of law. Judges should not fear that their impartial decisions will subject them to threats of reprisal or even worse, physical attacks, attempted assassinations. The United States Marshal Service here and around the country does a tremendous job of protecting our federal judges. Because of that, there are very few assassinations of federal judges or serious, credible attempts on their lives. The last time a federal judge was assassinated was over 25 years ago in Birmingham, Alabama. Court of Appeals Judge Robert Vance was murdered at his home. Judge Corrigan was 1.6 inches from becoming the next federal judge murdered. 1.6 inches. Aaron Richardson stole a .30-06 rifle, hid in the bushes outside Judge Corrigan's window, and fired a shot at the back of his head while he was watching television with his wife. Again, that shot missed the back of Judge Corrigan's head by 1.6 inches. I cannot overstate how close Judge Corrigan was to losing his life for no reason other than fulfilling his responsibilities as a federal district judge, for serving us, for serving the United States fairly and impartially, from fulfilling his constitutional obligation to follow the law. Now, there were many agencies involved in the investigation of this case. The shooter, Aaron Richardson, was arrested less than 3 days after attempting to murder Judge Corrigan. It was a great effort that brought together federal, state, and local law enforcement. The FBI played the leading role. The agents here, as well as the lab up in Quantico, Virginia. The United States Marshal Service, which does a great job protecting our judges, played a leading role in the investigation as well. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, our great partner here in the Middle District of Florida, in the Jacksonville area, also played a very significant role in the investigation. And you're going to hear today from leaders of those three agencies. But there were many other agencies involved, and I'm just going to give you the names of a few of those agencies. It's not all-inclusive, but we had a great deal of help from the Baker County Sheriff's Office, of course, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, our great partner in all firearms-related offenses and those types of violent crimes, the Daytona Beach Police Department, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the State Attorney's Office for the 7th Judicial Circuit, led by R.J. Larissa, and the United States Probation Office. We also had help from some agencies who aren't physically present today, but they played a very significant role in our investigation. Those include the Bethune-Cookman University Department of Public Safety, the Clay County Sheriff's Office, the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office, and the State Attorney's Office for the 4th Judicial Circuit. You know, in addition to commending all of these agencies, I want to express great thanks to Judge Scott Kugler from the Northern District of Alabama. To avoid any appearance or potential appearance of impropriety or impartiality or partiality, Judge Kugler came down to Jacksonville to try this case. He did a tremendous job, a great personal sacrifice. He did a great job today. He's done a great job throughout, and I really thank him for his service on this case. I also would like to thank two AUSAs, Assistant U.S. Attorneys in our office, Mac Hevener and Mark Devereaux. They are two of the finest prosecutors in the country, as well as two of the best trial lawyers in the state of Florida. worked this case tirelessly. They did everything possible to make sure the investigation was buttoned down. They tried a case with over 50 witnesses and 400 exhibits. They did it all with great professionalism, and if you saw what they did in the courtroom, if you'd seen what they did outside the courtroom, you'd be just as proud, if not more proud, of their efforts there. Just tremendous, tremendous prosecutors. And after the prepared remarks by me and the other representatives of law enforcement, you'll have a chance to pose questions to both Mac Hevener and Mark Devereaux about some of the physical evidence that we brought here into the jury assembly room for you all to see today. It's really, I think you'll be very impressed with the evidence that they helped pull together for the trial. And finally, I'd like to thank the Corrigans. Judge Corrigan and his wife were victims of a very serious crime that shattered their sense of safety. And we deal with many victims in the U.S. Attorney's Office. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, I can tell you, I don't recall any case in which we've had victims who've shown so much grace and patience as the Corrigans. They're two of the finest people you could ever meet. They're our friends. We love the Corrigans. And the attack on them was not only an attack on the people we care so much about. As I said at the beginning, it was an attack on the entire rule of law upon which this country was founded. Again, thank you so much to the Corrigans. They should be commended for their bravery and their grace. So at this time, I'm going to turn the podium over to Special Agent in Charge Michelle Klimt from the FBI. Thank you.
Good morning. The FBI always gets their man. But in the case of Aaron Richardson, he was convicted thanks to the fine work and collaboration of the agencies that are represented here. I want you to know that their efforts cannot be overstated. Thank you for your hard work and your dedication. The investigators in this case faced monumental challenges of finding a needle in a haystack. They sifted through countless leads, conducted hundreds of interviews, and promptly gathered key pieces of evidence. Dozens of potential suspects were quickly eliminated. An elaborate scheme laid out by Aaron Richardson was unraveled. Despite his lies, in an effort to mislead the investigation, it soon became clear we had the right guy. Seamless coordination was also instrumental in this case. Each of the agencies represented here provided expertise and manpower that were crucial to track down leads and eliminating the possibility of other threats. 3 years ago, Aaron Richardson laid in wait to assassinate Judge Corrigan. That idea that someone should attempt to kill a federal judge is a heinous attack on our justice system. Such actions will not be tolerated and will be prosecuted. Let me be clear. Together with our law enforcement partners, the FBI will work diligently to aggressively investigate those who threaten or intimidate federal officials who are doing their jobs in the pursuit of justice. Thank you again to our partners who investigated this case and continue to provide support to the FBI in keeping this community safe. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Berger, the United States Marshal, Middle District of Florida. As everyone is aware, this all started on June 22nd, 2013, when Aaron Richardson, without any pre-indication, decided to kill federal judge Timothy Corrigan, while his Honor and his wife were watching TV at their home. This incident became very personal to the men and women of the United States Marshal Service. Our primary responsibility in the United States Marshal Service is the protection of the judiciary and all the persons who participate in the federal judicial system. We take our responsibility very seriously. As mentioned, Mr. Richardson gave no warning, nor did we have any information or intelligence what Mr. Richardson had planned to do on the night of June 22nd, 2013. However, based on the quick response of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and the information that was passed on by U.S. Probation Office here in Jacksonville to Deputy United States Marshals, it was quickly developed that Mr. Richardson was a possible suspect. Members of the United States Marshal Service, along with the Jacksonville FBI and U.S. Marshals Task Force, comprising of local members of Clay County, St. Johns County, and Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, were able to bring Mr. Richardson into custody within 72 hours after the incident, initially for parole violation and for later attempted murder of federal judge Timothy Corrigan. I want to thank the U.S. Attorney, Lee Bentley, and his staff for putting all the pieces of this puzzle together that led to the successful conviction of Mr. Richardson. His office has done a tremendous job. As mentioned, the other federal agencies that played a significant part in this combined with this successful investigation, the FBI, ATF, and U.S. Probation Office. Also to be commended is former Sheriff John Rutherford and now Sheriff Mike Williams of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Rick Beasley of Clay County, Sheriff David Shore of St. Johns County, and the FDLE for their continued participation in the United States Marshals Task Force. I would also be remiss if I did not point out the extraordinary efforts of the men and women of the Baker County Sheriff's Office under the leadership of Sheriff Joey Dobson, for the past 3 years has had custody of Mr. Richardson, who has not been a model prisoner during his stay. I know Sheriff Dobson is retiring, and he certainly will be missed. He and his agency have been great partners to the United States Marshal Service. I also want to formally thank the following Deputy United States Marshals and Task Force members: Penelope Knox, our supervisor here in Jacksonville; Deputy Nathan Personette; retired Deputy Lisa Alfonso; Deputy United States Marshal Larry Brown has now been assigned to Orlando; and for the arrest that took place that evening, Deputy Marshal Del Rocio, Jeff Alvarez of the St. John's Sheriff's Office, Dave Brock of FDLE, Mike Calhoun of Clay County, Rodney Pickney of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and Wes Boham, who was a Jacksonville K-9 officer. Finally, best wishes and thoughts go out to His Honor, Judge Corrigan and his wife Nancy, and the family that has had to live through this traumatic situation for the past 3 years. Hoping that the closing of this book, that they can get their lives to some type of normal again. Thank you.
I'm Under Sheriff Pat Ivan of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. This is a terrible incident that highlights the danger that exists for all our officials. And we are grateful to the law enforcement partners that work with us when their safety is compromised. I won't talk about the case other than to say we have incredible working relationships with the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, and other agencies. In this case, our patrol officers and our special investigations detectives were there from the beginning and glad to launch what would become a successful investigation. But also we were there to serve the judge and his family, who were legitimate victims. Justice has been served, and your criminal justice agencies once again demonstrated that in this community in Northeast Florida, we are singularly focused on the safety of our citizens and working together toward that goal. Those who bring harm to our citizens and create danger in our community will be dealt with. Thank you.
Before we move to review any questions about the evidence on display, are there any questions of anyone on the stage?
I have a question.
Yes.
Ann Schmidt, first question is, I wonder if you could talk about what has changed in terms of security measures for U.S. district judges since this.
Well, I think that question is probably best addressed to our Marshal, Bill Berger, if you can talk about it.
Well, certainly. We analyze any situation as this occurs. We have a special team of judicial security experts that go through every instance, whether it be through written communications, whether it be through verbal communications. Again, it's the entire court family, U.S. Attorney's Office, U.S. Defense Attorneys, any court member at all, once we know a credible threat or what we believe after investigation is a credible threat, we then work with our partners, the FBI, and we start active investigations. As Mr. Bentley said, it had been 25 years from a similar situation that occurred with Judge Vance in Alabama. Every one of those is continually reviewed over and over again. We constantly update when we receive intelligence, information that we put out through video communications, internet communications, through our court family, through the marshals within the offices themselves, because every new incident could highlight something that may be occurring in our particular district itself. As far as inside the building itself, I mean, we prize ourselves on locking this down. We have tremendous security in regards to that. But again, too, as this incident he was in the comforts of his home. And unless we have some type of intelligence or information, it's just very difficult to kind of predict those types of things. So again, our next role would be to work with our federal partners to try and bring as quickly, as expeditiously as possible, a conclusion to this effort. Okay?
Yes, although is there more need for when someone's in the comfort of their own home for additional protection?
Well, we do provide security systems. Certainly if we feel, and our experts, we do on-site evaluations. We work with the judges specific for that. If that has to be enhanced, we go ahead and do that. It really depends on the circumstance itself. Thank you.
As a quick follow-up question, if that's okay, when it comes to security overall, do you have your federal judges or anyone in this vicinity, are they able to go through a course to be able to train or get more educational knowledge about how to keep them and their family safe?
Absolutely. Of course, the newest threat today is cybercrime. And I say that because the footprints that each one of us have on social media is something that we sit down with our federal judges, with their families, and inform them that within a short period of time, somebody could find out exactly where you live, where you work, where you participate. That's everyone in this country. So that's our main focus today, because with a couple of keystrokes, you can find out just about anything. That's why we even caution, our own families to be very careful about that footprint that you leave. But that's been the biggest focus right now. Physical security, we're pretty good at that. But the key thing is we're in a new world, and cyber is something that affects everyone's lives.
Mr. Richardson gave a somewhat rambling statement in his sentencing hearing today, and I honestly struggled to understand what he was trying to say, but he apologized, but then said something that kind of suggested he didn't believe he was guilty. What was your opinion on his statement, and do you believe he is remorseful for his actions?
He didn't appear to be remorseful. He didn't accept responsibility. He made some claim that the truth will later come out, suggesting that at some point his actions will be vindicated. Of course, they will not be. This was a heinous crime. And touching upon something that our marshal just said, this attack would have been bad if it had been anywhere, at the courthouse, out on the street near the courthouse. The fact that the judge was attacked at his home makes it even more reprehensible. Judge Kugler pointed out that what he fears most as a federal judge is being attacked at his home, where his family would also be in harm's way. And again, that's something that Richardson did. That's one of the reasons the sentence imposed was so severe, and rightfully so. And despite that attack at his home, Judge Corrigan was unbowed. In addition to being graceful and patient as a victim, he also showed tremendous courage on a going forward basis. Right after the assassination attempt, he was back at the courthouse doing his job, fulfilling his constitutional responsibilities. And we, as U.S. citizens, should be especially proud of the way he stood up under fire.
I have a quick question for you. The judge today seemed visibly emotional during sentencing. He seemed moved. And I wonder just if you can speak to how affecting this case was for people in law enforcement, given the nature of the attack.
I think it affected all of us. Judge Corrigan, as I mentioned, is a luminary here in Jacksonville. only is he a tremendous judge, he was a tremendous lawyer before that. He's extremely well respected in Jacksonville and around the country, and he's just a good man. Everyone who's met him would tell you the same thing. And so we were touched personally, just as we would if any friend or colleague had been subject to that kind of attack. But as was said in the courtroom today, Judge Corrigan, in addition to being our friend, he is the embodiment of the judiciary, the rule of law. I believe that Judge Corrigan may have said that in his own statement. And so it was an attack not just on him, but on all of us who were parts of the judicial system, and an attack on all of us as Americans. Really, this country, as you know, is founded on the rule of law. Any attack on the judges who serve threatens their independence, and it threatens what makes us Americans.
We'll take 2 more questions from the stage, please.
I was wondering, Richardson, you said for his sentence is 343 years. For anyone that, is in a wrong mindset or is thinking about committing some type of crime similar to Richardson, is there a clear message that you would like to get out to them?
The message is any threat to a federal judge or other member of the federal judicial system will be investigated. No stone will be left unturned. There were literally hundreds of federal, state, and local law enforcement agents converging upon Jacksonville within hours of this assassination attempt. The investigation was as thorough as any I've ever seen. And once the investigation was concluded, the resources that went into getting this case ready for trial were as thorough as any I've seen. I mean, again, a lot of the credit for that goes to all of our law enforcement partners and our 2 AUSAs who tried this case. Matt Kevner and Mark Devereaux worked around the clock, both during the investigation and during the preparation leading up to the trial.
Last question.
This was not Carlos Lader, where you had snipers on the roof of the federal courthouse back in the day. This was, in many ways, a fairly minor defendant, not someone who got a lot of attention. What does it mean that someone who was probably not going to get life or a long prison sentence for his previous violation did this? Is this a concern that someone who honestly could have been sentenced and still had life still chose to do something this extreme?
It just goes to show that we have to be ever vigilant. It's not just criminal defendants facing life sentences who pose a potential threat to judges. It could be anyone. It could be a criminal defendant looking at a probationary sentence. It could be a civil litigant. State judges handling divorce proceedings could be targets. I mean, any judge could be subject to threats of reprisal or a physical attack because of the rulings that they make. And it's incredibly important to our entire system of justice that we do everything we can to provide whatever measure of security we can for the judges and the others who serve in the judiciary. I think that's going to conclude the remarks from the podium here, but I really would welcome you to ask questions of our 2 AUSAs, Matt Kevner and Mark Devereaux. They're extremely knowledgeable about all the facts and circumstances of the case, and they could tell you a little bit about these physical exhibits we have over here to my left. So do you have any questions of them, or would you like them to tell you about some of the physical exhibits here?
I would like him to tell us about the physical exhibits.
Feel free to bring your equipment over.
I'm Matt Kevner, and Mark Devereaux and I were the trial counsel on the case. I'll give you a little bit of background about Aaron Richardson before I start explaining some of these exhibits, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about kind of the lead up to the shooting and some of the forensics that were involved, because not only did the FBI play a role as an agency, but their crime lab did an immense job in processing some of this evidence. So Aaron Richardson was a 24-year-old young man who was serving a term of federal supervised release. While he was serving that term of supervised release, he began committing burglaries in the Volusia County area. As a result of being arrested for those burglaries, he was facing a violation of his supervised release here in Jacksonville before Judge Corrigan. The most Judge Corrigan could have sentenced him to was 2 years. But what Mr. Richardson decided to do was to use Judge Corrigan's power as a judge, his name, and he came up with a kind of a fictitious order that released him of all of his criminal charges, both in Volusia County and here in Jacksonville and elsewhere. We know that the Volusia County authorities filed burglary charges against Aaron Richardson, and we know that he appeared in court on May 28th of 2013. We know forensically from his cell phone that the night before he began doing internet searches for Judge Corrigan, his address, and that type of thing, and we know that that continued throughout the day on May 28th. What we also know is that on June the 25th, after the shooting attempt occurred, the U.S. Marshals Task Force, which if you've heard Marshal Berger give credit to those men, these are the people that are wearing police armor, and they had to go in and break through the apartment door. And when they went into Mr. Richardson's apartment, they located this. This is it's a Savage Arms 30-06 rifle. And Mr. Devereaux is going to talk a little bit about how this was used, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how this came into Aaron Richardson's hands. What we know is that on June 5th of 2013, Aaron Richardson showed up at the Sports Authority store in Regency Square. It's no longer operating, and he had about a 23-minute conversation with the store manager there. He was very interested in high-powered rifles. In fact, this is the highest powered rifle that the Sports Authority store sold. If you look at the box of ammunition for this rifle, it'll indicate that it's powerful enough to kill a bear. That took place on June the 15th. On June the 20th, Mr. Richardson entered the Sports Authority store at 8:57 p.m., and we have store surveillance showing us that. He never left. And the Sports Authority store at the time, they had this motion-activated sensor that would start doing video surveillance. And once Mr. Richardson stayed in the store that night at about shortly before midnight or shortly after midnight, he started crawling across the floor to the rifle section. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the forensics in this case. And this is safe, but the Sports Authority store, they kept their rifles on a alarmed cable, and you'll see on this rifle that the trigger guard it's been cut. And that's how he was able to cut it from or to take it from the Sports Authority store. At the time this rifle was recovered by the marshals, there was a bunch of black electrical tape around this trigger guard, and there was also some tape on the rifle itself. What Mr. Richardson did, and Mr. Devereaux will tell you about all this, but in terms of forensically, when this rifle was recovered and when Mr. Richardson was arrested, he had almost a half-moon scar over his eye. And so the FBI lab in Quantico was able to obtain DNA from the back scope, so we know we know he's used the rifle. The other thing that happened in the crime scene itself, and Mr. Devereaux will get into this a little more specific, but at the scene itself, there were several pieces of black electrical tape that were located. So the FBI lab in Quantico was able to take the tape that was around the trigger guard and forensically match that tape to the tape that was located in Judge Corrigan's yard. That forensic match, it's not only measuring the tape and doing things like that, but it's actually doing a chemical analysis. And so each tape manufacturer, they use a different chemical process. And so that tape was forensically tied to this rifle, and the tape was also found in Judge Corrigan's yard. There was also DNA on the scope. There was also DNA elsewhere on the rifle. So we could place this rifle in Mr. Richardson's hands. At the Corrigan's residence, the FBI recovered a partial footprint. And that's what this is. This is the actual cast of that print. This is the overlay of Mr. Richardson's shoe print. And so you can see how that matches up. That was in the yard right outside the Corrigan's window. And so that's basically a lot of the forensics in the case was the processing of Mr. Richardson's cell phone showed all these searches for the Corrigans, their residence, their address, and so forth. Mr. Richardson actually had Judge Corrigan's phone number and his wife's phone number saved in his cell phone as a phone contact under the name Mission Freedom. And so we were able to use all of that. And then I'll let Mr. Devereaux tell you a little bit about the events of June 24th, or June 23rd into the 24th.
I don't think anyone can say that a man that would take a firearm and try to murder a federal judge is doing anything but bold. At the same time that he was bold, he was very cunning. The reason I say that is instead of throwing out dates, we're going to put the date that he actually went in that Mr. Hevner was mentioning about his looking at this firearm. Because during the trial, we actually played a tape where he was looking at this firearm, speaking to the manager of the Sports Authority for like 23 minutes. And it was in between this firearm and one other, and this is the one he stole. Now, he stole the firearm technically on a Friday. He overstayed. He went into the Sports Authority at Regency. He stays within, we have him on surveillance video going in at about 9:02 on the Thursday evening. It closed at 10. He never leaves. He hid out somewhere. Bottom line is the surveillance in the building, it was motion activated. We catch him doing the low crawl, and he steals the weapon. And as Mr. Hevner said, he cut it from the cable, and he exited the back door, and what would have been behind would have been Best Buy, if you're familiar with the area. There are lots of things we know. There's some little things we don't know. We do know this, and when I say he was cunning, because the day he stole that firearm, he hid it. He hid it somewhere. And then within 20 minutes of leaving the back of the building, he ends up going over to the theater there at Regency, went up and approached, and there's two gentlemen were talking. He approached them a little after 1 o'clock, and he asked to borrow one of the person's cell phones, although we know he had his own. But he asked to use another person's cell phone, and he called his mother. And his mother drove up because his mother actually lives on the other side off of 295, but on the other side towards Orange Park. So we're talking a good distance. She picks him up, and then now we come into Saturday. Saturday, the Corrigans ended up attending a wedding for a young man that they saw grow up. They raised their children in their community, and they were invited and attended a wedding of a neighbor's child. They came home at approximately 11:45. They end up, what happens, we know, is if you start putting two frames together, we know that Mr. Richardson, when I say he's cunning, he ended up purchasing a movie ticket to see a movie called Now You See Me, Now You Don't. Which is odd a little bit, because if you ever see that show, it's about a criminal trying to pull it over on the FBI. Well, lo and behold, that didn't work. But we know he purchased the ticket. We know that because we actually recovered the ticket stub. Have no belief, whatever, that he attended that movie. Maybe he'll get to watch it in the next 100 years. But what we do know is he ended up at Judge Corrigan's house. I'm not going to name the location. I'll just say that the house, it's brick. It's a standard, if we just put houses on the street. And when the Corrigans purchased their home, it was basically a rectangle shoebox, long part next to the street. They did some renovations. They put a sunroom on and a larger master bedroom. The sunroom is all pretty much glass, except it had, I'll call it a kick plate or wall, a short wall, higher than what we see here. And the whole sunroom is surrounded by glass because Mrs. Corrigan wanted to be able to have the beautiful view of there's a lake behind the house. So the windows were all up. There were actually blinds here. And the blinds were up. They never used to put them down. Why did he buy the ticket at 8:02, 8:03? Well, he didn't know that the Corrigans were going to be going to a wedding. But he needed to think at 8 o'clock, it gets dark at about 9 o'clock, and he knew that where they lived. Because we can put him there early on from different types of technology that we're able to follow cell phones. So what happens is if you just think of two houses together in a row, their home looks in the back. We're facing their house. In the back is the sunroom. To the right, the house on the right has a hedgerow of very mature viburnum bushes all along the whole side, and that complete side, they don't have any windows. What we end up knowing, because there was an impression in the bushes, we know that he was there because we also have the footprint. Because this footprint is actually, if we had the full picture, there's viburnum bushes, and this is next to the neighbor's house. Now, if we put ourselves here and we take this firearm, he ends up, our best belief is he gets down, and here you go. Put me 30 feet away. Judge Corrigan, they got home from the wedding. Judge Corrigan goes inside, and he has his lounge chair, sort of a lazy boy type. And the judge was just calming down a little bit from, winding down from the festivities. He's leaning back in the chair. So picture this. We'll come back a little ways. I'm 30 feet away. And when I look through this firearm, he had no real experience with the firearm. But looking at this firearm, you can quickly see that we all see straight ahead. And when you look through this scope, it looks straight ahead. It doesn't bend. What happens is if we went out and shot this firearm, if I shot this at a specific target, the bullet wouldn't meet where I'm looking until about 200 yards because the bullet actually is technically lobbed up a little bit and then comes up to where your eyesight is. But when he looked through, he's looking through because the judge is leaning back, and you can imagine the judge's head is here. And he saw, without a doubt, he had in his heart the intent to murder. Because we know that because this is 1.6 inches from where the judge's head would be, because when he looked through the scope, he only saw the judge's head, but the muzzle of the weapon match it. You see where it goes. And that's why it's so serious. There's no question that he was trying to murder the judge. Once he took the shot, he got what's called scope bite or scope kiss. Anybody that's fired at firearms a lot, they're going to get it someday. Some will admit it and some won't. But you'll get a little kiss if you don't hold that firearm snug in. And he got it right over his right eye. He's right-handed. We showed that. Imagine if we went to a range, the first thing I'd hand you is ear protection. Because the sound of this firearm is deafening. Now, amplify that with the fact it's between two brick buildings. Amplify that with the fact that you've got a man that shot this for the very first time because we collected 19 of the cartridges, the bullets. We know where the one went. It went through here. You see this hole? This is nothing. That's where it comes out. This side, and literally shrapnel from this window frame cut the judge on his forehead and hit his right arm and then got embedded in the arm of the chair. You can only imagine, we did have dogs that came, and we know they lost his scent once he hit the road. We didn't know if he had a car or not. Bottom line, what we do know is he ended up going to a restaurant that was just getting ready to close just around 2 o'clock. And he ends up going into the restaurant. That restaurant person testified for us and noticed that he was bleeding and actually stated it looked like he had just come out of the woods. And there's some woods in between the location of the judge's home and this restaurant. And once we got that, what did he do? He used somebody else's phone. He said, "Could I borrow your phone? Because I need to call my mom to pick me up." And mom picks him up, and we know what time he got back to the apartment. 3:17 a.m. is he got back. And that evening, is what's more distressing, is he didn't get rid of this weapon. He actually started searching, how can I make this quieter? I want to build a silencer. And two, how can I make it more accurate? And so that man had nothing but a continual murder in his heart and the intent to commit his mission. But his mission was denied. And why? Because there was a dog that took him into custody first from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Canine Unit. And the dog's name was, Mr. Hevner?
Justice.
And justice has been given in this case, and he will never see the light of day.
Very lucky that he wasn't experienced with this firearm or any firearm.
You figure, what did he do? He thought this was a Nido-Keen Skeeto because it's got a scope on the top, and it looks the meanest one that he could find in there. They don't sell the assault-type rifles in that location. And so he picked this one. Had he picked a rifle that didn't have a scope and used what they call the hard sights, just looking through the hard sights on the weapon, our judge would be dead, and Mrs. Corrigan would be a widow, and that was his intent, no question. And we can just say that there are good things that happen to good people, and I think that's why, Nancy, you've still got your husband forever.
Do you know if he had any type of background or knowledge when it comes to guns? Has he ever shot a gun before?
No. In fact, the store manager that he interacted with, he advised the store manager he was previous military, and that's one of the counts he was convicted of, was impersonating a military officer. He advised the store manager he was previous special forces, but didn't appear to know the difference between a shotgun and a rifle. So that's why, literally, his inexperience and incompetence is why Judge Corrigan is with us today.
What's the legal definition, like distinction between murder and an assassination?
It's something that's for political reason. The actual charge is attempting to murder a federal judge, and there's a federal statute. If someone attempts to murder any federal official, it becomes a federal crime. But that's the distinction. It's a politically motivated or motivated on account of not something that Judge Corrigan did as a person, but something Judge Corrigan, who's somebody that the president appointed and the Senate confirmed, he was doing his job, and that's why he was targeted by Mr. Richardson.
You said in court that there are very few cases that ever warrant the maximum sentence. How important was it that he got the maximum sentence to send a message to others that something like this is intolerable? That's exactly why we argued that. That's exactly why we think Judge Kugler sentenced him to the maximum. This is just not tolerable in a free society.
When were you sure it was him? Was it after you arrested him and found all of this, or were you pretty sure that he was the guy even before the canine came in?
So the part of the forensics was ballistics work, and early on in the investigation, the FBI sent the the bullet fragments. There were 2 bullet fragments. If you look at the window, you see how there's one hole in the window? When the bullet hit this window, it shattered into 2 projectiles. Those 2 projectiles went flying across the Corrigan's den, and you see 2 holes in the door. They went through this glass door into an adjacent room, and that's where you see the 2 holes in the drywall. And then they go through 2 separate walls. And this is to show you the power of this weapon. The projectiles come to rest in a wrapping paper bag. And so the FBI sent those projectiles to the lab in Quantico. A couple of days later, the lab in Quantico came back. They couldn't identify the exact rifle that the projectiles came from, but they could say from what remained of those projectiles that it was a .30 caliber rifle. And they could say that that .30 caliber, those projectiles came from one of 3 known weapons, including the Savage Arms 30-06. Once that came out, then we started looking at Mr. Richardson's cell phone, and then you start seeing all these searches for Judge Corrigan. You start seeing the judge's phone numbers saved under Mission Freedom, and then you find this order that he had prepared in his apartment that exonerates him of all these charges. That's when things became pretty explanatory, and then the forensics just all lined up and showed.
At some
that
point,
it's
what
gonna-
you found must have seemed just kind of preposterous when you realized what he actually had masterminded, if you will.
In our line of work, nothing seems preposterous. You never get something that seems preposterous.
Isn't this kind of a bizarre mixture of cunning, as you've said, but also abject stupidity? I mean, that order, no lawyer would have ever believed it was real. He didn't know how to use the gun, and yet, in some ways, he seems very sharp, and in some ways, just he has no idea what he's doing.
He did not have the added knowledge that someone that was a lawyer would have had, but it was very. In fact, the order itself uses a bunch of legal terms. It looks like a real order, and so he just didn't have that added knowledge of the way things actually worked.
The defense talked about his mental health. Oh, okay. The defense talked about his mental health. I was wondering, can you give me an understanding of what his state of mind was during this?
The only thing I can tell you is that what we know from the bullet trajectory and where the shots were fired, that his state of mind was he intended to kill Judge Corrigan, and I don't pretend to know anything else of what he was thinking other than we know forensically what he intended to do.
Thank you. If you look inside your press packet, you're going to see a sentencing memorandum with a lot of details in there, so if you please review that document, I think it'll be helpful to answer some of those blanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me tell you one other thing. On a state of mind, who else could put all this together? I mean, he puts together to purchase a ticket in the movie because he had no idea they'd be gone. And that would have been, hey, I was at the movie.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good work, guys.
Thank you.